Founded in 1957, for decades Leisure Books distributed an array of popular fiction. It garnered success catering to the flavors of the market through the years. From sci-fi and westerns in the early years, and turning to darker content like thrillers and horror by the mid-80s. Published March 1st, 1986, Resurrexit by Leona C. This falls into the subgenre of horror, supernatural, medical, occult. Possessed by twisted passion, she risked damnation to raise her lover from the dead. The etymology is a little complex, but essentially it means to rise again under the derivatives of resurgence or resurrection from the Latin roots. A similar cover, also published by Leisure 2 years later in 1988, is John Teague's Vessel, also featuring a hand gripping a chalice featuring a bloody liquid. Now, I'm in preference more towards Resurrexit. We have more ornate chalice here. Look at these type of aquatic monstrous creatures. Even a better base. You got the blood pouring out over here. Even the hand looks more scary. Now, an examination. This one has a reflection in it where Resurrexit doesn't. It's the fingernail polish. I mean, if it didn't have the red fingernail polish, maybe it'd be more grim. John Teague's had a number of horror novels published by Leisure, all with tremendous covers. On to the review of Resurrexit 1986 by Leona C. A young couple rent a shabby cabin in Maine for the summer. Although they're on a break from college in New York, Mike and Sandy do newlywed things like talk about having a baby and renovate the cabin with fun home improvement projects. In the attic, they discover an Ouija board and meet a spirit named Simon that compels them to visit his gravestone in the cemetery down the road. When they visit the town's library to research Simon's grave, that's when we meet the book's antagonist, Fanny, a psychopathic crone who spent her life concocting the perfect resurrection elixir. Fanny is awestruck at how closely Mike resembles her dead lover Simon. He's the anatomical quintessence of what host she needs to perform this revival. Not revealing her intentions, she soon woos Sandy into the temptation of communicating with ghosts by using magnets on the Ouija board to spell out subtle directives. An abundance of guile, coffee, and cigarettes occupy the pages. Mike is fed up with their antics, but before he leaves her behind, Sandy lures him into a deadly sacrament. Dressed in robes, a huddled cult encroaches on Mike, forcing him to guzzle down the red liquid, Simon's blood, in the ornate chalice seen gracing the cover. He wakes up the next morning, unharmed, and begins a slow transmogrification into Simon. Delusions and the horrid memories of Simon's tragic death materialize in Mike's mind. It turns out Fanny's treachery runs deep and vile. Simon was indeed her former lover back in the 1920s. However, she's also his murderer after catching him cheating with her sister. Fearing Simon may like the youthful Sandy, Fanny's haunting jealousy drives her to lock Sandy in a room and let her voracious boa constrictor devour her. Fanny had manipulated Sandy into believing it was ghosts and devilry, not letting her know about her youth serum. She had paid the nearby gravedigger to don a robe and be the muscle, but even he was swindled on payment. This is halfway through the book, and it feels like the climax. Fanny's farmhouse burns down, killing the gravedigger. Sandy escapes and ends up assigned to an asylum with amnesia and catatonia. A year rolls by, and Sandy is finally released into the care of no one. Among a slew of other nonsense, the book's logic starts to crumble, becoming extremely disjointed. Where were her parents? Why weren't Mike's notified? She wanders back to the cabin they had rented last summer. Somehow she's allowed to live there with no income. Simon, seeking revenge on Fanny, pops into Sandy's life, believing she'll eventually be able to lead him to Fanny. He's charming at first. That's until he gets her pregnant. Cold and now distant, he starts aging rapidly, with chunks of flesh decaying. He must find Fanny before he rots. However, Fanny is hiding out in underground tunnels, waiting for her youth pills to kick in. She can't very well re-enter Simon's life looking like a hag. This woman's insanity has no limitations. Sandy copes with all this by smoking while pregnant. After refusing to give him the youth pills, Simon goes bonkers and buries Fanny alive in his old grave, then ties Sandy to the tombstone. He succumbs to physical decay and dies. Is this the climax? No, Franny survives by eating anyone who treads over the cemetery grounds. Her underground tunnels lead back to her barn on the Willoughby farm. Sandy forsakes the place and reunites with her parents in New York, unwillingly to divulge anything that actually happened. Her memory finally returns, knowing now everyone's motives and how she was deceived. Eventually, the cops summon her back to Maine after bodies start piling up. But guess what? It's time to deliver Simon's abominable baby. Fanny figures using Simon's blood on his own son will splice the DNA better this time around. Disguised as a nurse, she whisks the baby away and injects it with the serum. However, it isn't Simon's baby. It's Mike's baby, if that makes any sense. Something about soul transference, even though the supernatural element had been debunked by Fanny throughout the book. Whatever. In the end, Sandy and Mike reconcile, and of course, the hospital burns down, seemingly killing Fanny. My final thoughts are, despite the narration's uneven path, Leona C. Ross has beautiful prose that makes it worth giving a read. If it wasn't another author's pseudonym, it was her only book published. The only other Leona Ross I found on the web was a woman who started a GoFundMe in 2017, imploring for donations to pay her heat and electric bills in order for her fur babies to survive. This was another segment from the Pulp Arcanum podcast. Review by JBM, published in February 2018 on villainnews.com.